Let's start then, and I'll do something terribly rude. I'll start talking before I have introduced the panel. But, you know, there's a reason to it, there's a choreography, and I would like to set the scene before we go to the panel. And yes, can we have that presentation? Thank you very much. So this is a little different title than the one that is in the program. AI will solve the climate crisis, so what's the problem, right? I mean, this is what we are asking ourselves, some of us. And I would like to, just for a few minutes, tell you what we are talking about today. Should I say tonight? No, let's stick with today. So it's more than a year ago that Sam Altman said at Davos that future AI depends on energy breakthrough, right? And not so long ago, it was Eric Schmidt who was in the American Congress in a hearing, and he said, we need energy. And he didn't just say we need energy, he said we need energy in all forms. Renewable, non-renewable, whatever it needs to be there, and whatever, it needs to be there, and it needs to be there quickly. So a colleague of mine in a private chat said, oh, it's rats under the carpets for AI, you know, referencing the Red Scare of the 1950s and 1960s in the United States, because it appears that everything is the race against China now. And this means that, yeah, we can do everything. An on-site natural gas plant will help power Stargate's first data center public filings show. You all heard about Stargate, the $500 billion investment in AI, and maybe not so many of you have heard about how it's going to be powered with fossil fuels. At least that's the plan for now. We have a Memphis data center that is built by Elon Musk, and here is an interesting satellite picture that the Southern Environmental Law Center made to show that there are several gas turbines that they claim are illegal because they didn't get the permits for them. There are too many at the same time, and they just used portable ones because there was no way to get the permits for the regular one, and of course there was no time, because time is up, you know, we need to be in the race. And of course people ask, or people say, residents say, they're choking on its pollution. They are producing methane, and that is very dangerous, and that is already in an area where there is a lot of environmental hazard. At the same time, some of the largest companies who claimed in the past that they are really, really doing well on renewable energy and energy transition are walking back their promises. Google and Microsoft among them. And a new report by the Lawrence Berkeley Lab on behalf of the American Department of Energy shows that the United States, whoops, there's something missing, sorry about that, there's a slide missing, says that there will be a tremendous increase in data center energy, and not just that, the energy that is going to be used for data centers is also more CO2 intensive than others. We'll talk about the details in a moment. And in Europe, that didn't go unnoticed. I mean, the rush to AI, you know about von der Leyen, who launched the world's largest public-private partnership to win the AI race, Invest AI. No one knows where the money is going to come from. We haven't found out yet. It was announced at the AI Action Summit in February. And of course, you know about Plug Baby Plug, Emmanuel Macron's push for French nuclear-powered AI, because they, he says, have all the energy they need. So where does this all lead us? Ah, there's the slide that was missing, sorry. By 2028, more than half of the electricity going to data centers will be used for AI. That's this estimation by the Lawrence Berkeley Lab. At that point, AI alone could consume as much electricity annually as 22% of all US households, and the carbon intensity of electricity used by data centers is 48% higher than the US average. And we'll hear a lot more about European numbers in a moment. This is why I used examples from the United States. And I don't know who saw this already. Google I/O was yesterday, I think, and they announced that there will be a ton of new AI features, meaning that AI, of course, will be everywhere. We already sense that. And, you know, in a sense, it means AI is shoved down our throats because there are hundreds of billions of USD or euros at stake. we can't escape it to make this business model work and to produce some return on investment on the hundreds of billions that have already flown into this space. Now, at Algorithm Watch, we already 5 years ago started to work on this with the project that we called Sustain for Sustainable AI, not AI for sustainability, but the question of how sustainable AI is. And we thought we should bring the false balance of AI's environmental harms and benefits to the forefront and the lack of transparency around sustainable AI. Also, the need to measure the energy and resource consumption of AI, and we would like to talk about today where we stand on this. And of course, the question will be here for the panel, what is it that we can do? There's an answer by the Save AI campaign. How can you help? Reduce your own consumption, drink less water, take shorter showers, and sit in the dark to ensure AI has enough resources to keep going. Okay, well, that's one approach. It's not the one that we agree with, so let's discuss this. And if you are interested to get in touch with us after the session, Angela Müller is here, the head of Algorithm Watch Switzerland, and I'm here. We will both be here for all 3 days. So if you see us and would like to talk about this, get in touch. And now I'll start with the introduction of the panelists and also asking them a first question before then Jill gives a presentation. So, sitting right next to me is Jill McArdle. She's the international corporate campaigner at Beyond Fossil Fuels, and her work focuses on the energy and emission footprint of data centers specifically and corporate accounting of carbon emissions, including the need for 24/7 renewable energy matching, which, you know, as a reminder, is already something that people here in the room will probably not be familiar with. You know, what is 24/7 renewable energy matching? I'll try to account for this because I'm new to the energy debate myself, in a sense, at least to the really depths of it. So whenever there's jargon, I'll try to detect it and remind ourselves that we need to be very careful and make ourselves understood. And the question to Jill, as to everyone else in this first round, is when you hear artificial intelligence and resource consumption, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Thank you, Matthias. Hi, everybody. Really nice to be here at CPDP. Very exciting. It's my first CPDP because we are not normally in the tech space. We're energy transition people. This is what Beyond Fossil Fuels does, but we have, as I'll explain, gotten in on data centers because it's so important for the energy transition. And what comes to mind when I think about resource consumption and AI is firstly that it's huge because there's so many different areas of resources that are being consumed by AI. And we're having this 2 parallel conversations. One, we're talking about the resource consumption, which is largely energy, but there is water, there is land, there is so many aspects as raw materials, you know, and some of these areas are not getting nearly enough focus and attention today. So we have this huge issue we're trying to deal with on the one hand, and on the other, we're having this conversation about the benefits of AI and how AI is so useful to solve climate change, for energy efficiency, and other things. And both of these conversations happening separately are fine. The problem arises when you start taking the second conversation about AI's benefits and you start claiming that these benefits can be used to offset the impacts and the harms of AI. This is a narrative we're seeing coming from the tech companies, and I'll talk about it a bit in the presentation, that we're quite concerned that it's permeating out from the tech companies into other policy spaces and preventing us from actually taking the action we need to deal with the impacts.
Thank you very much. And next in line is Claude Thomas. He was a member of the European Parliament from 1999 to 2018, so for quite a long time, and then Minister of Energy and Spatial Planning in Luxembourg from 2018 to 2023. And what I'd like to add here is that in Parliament, he first served on the Committee on Budgetary Control before joining the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy in 2002. So this is, of course, here in this context really important because he served as a rapporteur on the 2008 draft of the EU Renewable Energy Directive and on the EU Energy Efficiency Directive of 2012. So, you know, a real insider from the energy perspective. And Claude, again to you, artificial intelligence and resource consumption. What does that trigger?
It triggers for me, betrayal. Because when I was a rapporteur for the renewable energy in 2008, and when we renegotiated this around 2013, Google, Amazon, Meta were allies because they were investing into renewables. But now, and then they promised, they said to us, we will always be on your side for climate change. And I think in a moment where we have this insane alliance, Trump, Putin, the Saudi guy, the Qatar, so they are against women's rights, they are against legal rights. But what is driving them? It's the continuity of the fossil age, continuing to raise money and drive economies, and it's suicidal for the planet. And we needed the big tech companies because they were helping us to build up renewables. But now, they are on the other side. They don't care anymore for the climate. And they are now going to be an ally of the fossil fuel energy, of building gas. Gas in a moment where we can't afford any gas anymore and any coal anymore. So for me, Google and all these tech companies, I'm really angry at them because they betray us in a moment where we would need them on our side.
Okay, thank you. That was pretty clear. Now, over to Fanny Hedwigi. In contrast to Jill, who's here for the first time, it's probably your 10th time or something, Fanny, because she's a well-known face in this space here. She is now the policy director of AI at AI Collaborative, the organization behind Current AI. We'll come back to that a little later, what that all is. And before joining that, she led Access Now's policy and advocacy in Europe, where she had worked since 2016, so for quite some time. And Fanny, also, same question to you, AI and resource consumption.
Thank you. Speaking of resource consumption, how many of you are here at 8:45? I see
Whoa.
a medal to you all. Like it's a long day. So what comes to my mind? I will plus one to what was said, but as someone who is in the funding space right now, but was in civil society until recently, I will take it to another angle, just so we cover something else as well. I think of the parallels between the human rights and the climate movement. And I think of civil society resources and how the umbrella term from 2016, AI, has sucked out the air from many other rooms where human rights or climate change or environmental crisis came up. And how much time, energy, money we spent on things, and I don't want to minimize all the efforts and wins on the way, but on the grand scheme of things where we are now, these are quite incremental wins. And so what I'm thinking for the future is how can we spend all those resources to have new tactics, new strategies to try to achieve something more than just incremental change, and if legal avenues are at all interesting still, or we have to do something very different. And as a funder, I'm also interested in addressing this moment of crisis and create abundance out of scarcity for public interest causes.
Okay, more on that later. Thank you very much. And last but certainly not least is Boris Ruf. He is an AI researcher at AXA, the insurance company, where he leads the Sustainable AI initiative at a group level, and his research focuses on standardizing carbon footprint scenarios and developing methods to assess and mitigate the environmental impact of generative AI. He holds a Master of Science in Computer Science from EPFL. And Boris, over to you. AI and resource consumption.
Thank you very much, and hi everyone. Thanks for having me here. So to my mind comes, as a computer scientist, first when I think of artificial intelligence and the resources it takes. First, I'm really amazed by the breakthrough of technology and what this new technology can do. Now, it's a dilemma that this technology consumes so much energy, and if we compare this to human intelligence, like the brain, which only consumes like 20 watts, I think there's a lot of room for improvement yet, and that's probably what we're going to talk about now.
Okay, that was quick, but a very big question looming there. And Jill, I would like to ask you to tell us a little about the situation in Europe and data centers, or with Europe and data centers. The should come up any second, and then you can just click.
Can you hear me okay with
through
this?
it.
Great. I will try to lead. Any second.
Yeah,
Any second. Wait, there
here
it
we
is.
go.
Let's see if I can stand here and click at the same time. Yes. Hi, yeah, so I wanted to really briefly give you a bit of a background on the work that Beyond Fossil Fuels has done looking into Europe. As part of our mandate is to decarbonize the power sector and get it off fossil fuels and onto renewable energy by 2035. That's the goal, and that's what all of the work in our organization is aiming towards, and really ensuring that we don't just build more renewables, that we really phase out the fossil fuels that we have today, because that's the only way the energy transition actually contributes to fighting climate change. If we just build more energy and more renewables and we don't actually get rid of the fossil fuels, we don't actually solve the climate crisis. So that's a bit about Beyond Fossil Fuels. I think this is the right button. Yeah, so we looked at data center growth in Europe. Now, this is about AI. This talk is about AI. We tend to look at data centers, but we know that the growth is driven not entirely, but quite largely by AI, and especially the coming growth is largely driven by AI especially. So the two things for us became extremely interconnected, and the question of how much AI do we need and how many data centers do we need, these political debates tend to be quite intertwined. So we did a report back in February where we tried to do some very basic calculations, because we felt no one was asking some very basic questions about, if all this demand is coming, what is it going to mean for the energy transition? So we used a few numbers from the International Energy Agency, McKinsey, and we tried to come up with a number we could use to make some inferrals about the energy transition. So this is one number we came to, that in the higher end scenario, you could have new data centers in Europe, so not even the existing ones, but just the new ones, consuming as much power as the whole of Spain by 2030. Now, there's several estimates you'll find about what that number is actually going to be in 2030. There's a few different ones. The point is, it's a significant additional power demand in Europe, and how is that going to be fueled, and what does that mean for the climate? So we asked, what if like 60% of this is fossil fuels? Because we know that companies are willing to use gas and coal for now to fuel their data centers. So what happens if a lot of this is powered by fossil fuels? We got the very unsurprising result that this leads to a lot more emissions in Europe. So we had the 121 million was the high-end scenario that we came up with. That's equivalent to like all the gas plants burning in the UK, Germany, and Italy in 2024. So it's a significant amount for Europe. But we also asked the question, not what if it's fossil fuels, but also what if it's actually all powered by renewable energy? So this should solve the problem, right? Because if it's all renewables, the emissions go to zero, and that's fine. But we noticed another problem, because the demand growth is so high that actually you need quite a lot of the new renewables coming online in Europe to power the data centers. And we did a comparison where we came up with this number that it could potentially take up to 20% of the renewables coming online in the next few years in Europe just to power the new data centers. Again, we're not even talking about transitioning the existing ones to renewables. This would just be for the new demand. That's about the same as what the transport sector for the whole of Europe needs to decarbonize by 2030. And we see these things as very different. As people focused on the power sector, we would see that electrifying and decarbonizing the transport sector or the steel sector is a very important use of power, whereas data centers are not decarbonizing the economy directly, although some are claiming that their AI climate benefits could offset their power use. But we would not, we don't think this is a very powerful argument. So we saw this as a big concern. And we think it led us to the conclusion that we have to make sure that the new data centers coming online are, to the greatest extent possible, powered by renewable energy, especially energy that's additional to what we have today. Because otherwise, the data centers are going to, as this Pac-Man shows, they're going to eat up all the renewables, and we're going to have a crisis of other sectors needing to go on to fossil fuels. So I wanted to then tell you a bit about the obstacles we've experienced in trying to campaign and ask for renewable energy for data centers, and two obstacles we're facing that is originating, we see, from the big tech companies. And I firstly wanted to say that this basically indicates that the big tech companies, so Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta, are responsible for about 65% of the new demand coming into Europe. They're building their own hyperscale data centers, and the 34% in co-location is they're renting third-party space from these huge co-location data centers. And when you add them together, you get 65% of the new demand. Interestingly, the big tech companies, they'll report on their own data centers and their own emissions from their hyperscale centers, and they will try very hard not to tell you anything about the other 34%. So when they tell you their numbers, it tends to be only half of the picture because they're not talking to you about the space they're renting from these co-location data centers. Let me jump on. There we go. So this is the technical part that Matthias is worried could get very technical, and I will try to keep it from that. This is explaining the challenge we're having in getting credible renewable energy purchasing from the companies. So you might have seen that The Guardian had an article last year saying that data center emissions from the big tech firms are probably 662% higher than they claim. And the reason for this is because they can report in different ways on their renewable energy. And at the moment, they really like buying renewable energy certificates, which have actually got very little to do with the power that is going into their data centers. So this is the example of Amazon. They claimed last year, which you might have seen as well, that they became 100% renewable across their operations. Of course, you'll notice it says they're matching renewable energy in their operations. And this picture on the side shows kind of the reality of what they mean when they say that. So what they mean is they're buying renewable energy certificates, but these certificates have got very little to do with their actual energy use. The certificate is for renewable energy. Their data center might be in Germany. The renewable energy is produced in Spain during the day. The data center is running at night in Germany. This energy from Spain is not deliverable to the data center in Germany. But this is not a problem in the current system because they just have to buy the certificate and then they can tick a box and say we have renewable energy for our German data center, leading to this kind of absurd situation where a data center in Germany at night is supposedly running on solar power produced in Spain. And the problem with this system is, the company can pick up the phone and in one phone call they can buy all of their renewable energy for a year. And the problem, because the two things are not connected to each other, is that there's zero incentive in this system for the company to actually try to get the energy going into its data center to not be fossil fuels, because they know they can just buy a certificate and they don't have to worry about the fact that their grid they're on is actually running on fossil fuels. To make sure that their data center is not running on fossil fuels, they would have to buy more sophisticated renewable energy packages that would actually look for renewable energy that is deliverable to the data center, and ideally that is produced in the same hour as the data center needs the energy. It's only through that system, called hourly matching, can we actually get the energy transition done, because that way you can have the full grid decarbonized. If you don't do this, then you will just reach a limit in the energy transition and we'll never get further than, say, like 50, 60% of the grid on renewables. Only going to hourly matching will actually get us to 100%. But of course, it's slightly more complicated for the companies to do this than to just, sign a check, make a phone call. So there's resistance to moving towards a more accurate system, especially from some of the companies like Amazon and Meta. So at the bottom here, I put in the logo for the Emissions First partnership. This is a partnership set up by Amazon, supported by Meta, and supported by the other companies you can see there. And this is really an effort to go in the opposite direction to what I have just said. So instead of fixing the difficulty with having no connection between your renewables and your actual power, They want to completely decouple these things and to really allow them to offset their dirty energy use in their data centers with renewable energy that they might buy anywhere in the world and from any time. This is not going to help us with the energy transition. They have they have a lot of arguments for why they think this is the case, and I'd be more than happy to dig in afterwards if anyone wants to ask. I won't get into the complexity of emissionality and marginal emissions, but we as energy experts see that this system doesn't work and it's not going to decarbonize, but they're pushing it very, very powerfully. So that's one challenge. And the other, which is the final thing I wanted to say, is this narrative that we can offset the harms and the impacts of AI and data centers with the future benefits of AI for the climate crisis. And this, I really wanted to show this slide. This is from the International Energy Agency, which is a very well-respected agency that is very influential in the policy space on access to energy. They put out a report on AI and energy where they tried to do something that we consider quite problematic, which was to show, on the one hand, in the blue, you have the emissions from data centers. But then on the other side, in the large purple column, you have the supposed savings you might get from AI in the future. And they tried to make this argument that we should not worry about the data center emissions because look how many savings are coming in the future if we unleash AI. There are many problems with this. Firstly, that the assessment to try to calculate speculative future emissions, deeply unscientific and not very reliable, and you cannot measure this. And even if you could measure it, you cannot put this into a plus-minus equation with the concrete real-world emissions we're seeing today. Even if you could offset it, all you would do is just offset the future emissions that are coming, and we actually need to be reducing the emissions that we have today and not adding more and maybe balancing them out. Of course, we don't believe you even can balance them out. So this is from the IEA, but this is very much the narrative that the big tech companies are pushing quite hard in as many policy spaces as possible. And this is quite counterproductive to any effort to really say we need to regulate and we need to control the growth of AI and make sure that it happens in a way that aligns with our energy transition. This type of narrative opens the door to say we don't need to worry about it, let's just do what the tech companies want. So I just wanted to end with our alternative, which is a statement that was signed by many civil society organizations, which calls for a sane policy from Europe and the rest of the world on AI and sustainability, which is to phase out fossil fuels, to think about computing within sustainable limits, to look at the supply chains of the AI, and to think about equitable participation for communities and transparency as well. I didn't talk a lot about transparency. It's very important. Maybe we'll talk about it now. Anyway, thank you.
That was an excellent introduction and a primer for our discussion, which I would like to say in between here that I'm really grateful to Paul and Dana and the programming team that they said we want to have this discussion here and we also want to have it on the big stage. I would like to follow up with Boris here after we saw this, because you're an AI researcher. You already said that you think there can be more efficiency in this, and we just saw Jill present the numbers. Can you briefly describe what AXA's approach to this is, how you deal with the resource consumption? Because AXA has about 115,000 employees. When they roll out something like, everyone can now use an AI chatbot, that has some impact.
Yes, so let me share some insights of as a corporate consumer of AI or in digital services, how we actually deal with that. So first of all, we have already for a couple of years a quite advanced digital sustainability program in place, which means that we track all devices we use, our screens, our laptops, all the digital services we consume, and we do carbon computing, and we have internal objectives of how to reduce the emissions here. We actually also ask for location-based calculated emissions. That's an important point. As Gilles just mentioned, that market-based calculation means that you can take into account all these offsetting and all these these renewable energy certificates. That's something we do not use as internal calculation. We always insist on location-based accounting, which means that we have we actually use, we only look at the emissions that's actually emitted in this very moment. Now, of course, as a big international company, we would like to make use of AI, and here it's important to point out AI is not AI. So what we use mostly, really for now, is what's called statistical classification. So it's classification algorithms that produce results in terms of either categories, or it can be a float number or a price or something like this. And in terms of energy consumption, that's not so critical. So what's really critical is generative AI. And here, the problem we face that when we use all the emission reporting that's done by the cloud providing services is that there's a big lack of data, actually. So they report for server hosting, they report on data storage and all these kind of things, but when it comes to AI models, and in particular to closed models, we don't have this data. And as a user, that's a big problem, because we would like to make responsible use of the technology. So we would like to compare different solutions. We would like to only use these solutions when they make sense, so when the value is actually higher than the cost, and this includes the environmental cost. But we lack transparency here. And in order to overcome this, what we did is we developed a carbon data model. And we use this carbon data model to actually make projections and estimates for different AI models. So usually the way this works is that if you take a closed model, and that's like, for example, all the models of OpenAI, so the name is really misleading, all the models, and they are the most advanced ones, so in the industry we really like to use them because they're very performant. But we have very little details on those models. We don't know much about the architecture, not much about the parameters they have, and so on. So what we do is we take open models you can download, you can actually run on your infrastructure, you can measure electricity consumption and so on. And then we extrapolate the numbers and try to guess what such a closed model could actually consume in terms of energy, what it could emit in terms of emissions. And this internal data model is something we use a lot in order to compare scenarios. It can consider the carbon factor, which is a very important factor when it comes to it has a very big impact on the results, really. And then in the company, we have internal tools where data scientists and software engineers can actually make use of this, these models, and can, once they decide to make a new AI project, they can have different scenarios and they can benchmark those scenarios. We do a lot of trainings internally also, so we have workshops. We built a tool so you can actually include in your code, you can track the carbon emission, even though when it's an API, so it will log for you the estimated emissions. We have a tool that simulates as if it was an AI model, because of course when we train our employees, we don't want them to pollute extra or cause extra pollution only by playing with the AI model. So we want a system that behaves as an AI model. It provides the same responses and so on, but in fact you can only ask it a couple of questions around the Olympics, because that's when we built it a year ago. But it helps our people to educate, raise awareness around this topic. And yeah, so basically that's what we have in place for now, and that's how we try to implement these services in a responsible way.
Okay, I think we'll come back to this question of transparency again. And I'd also like to not remind you, but let you know that we will open up for questions. So please think about what you would like to know from the panelists. But I'll follow up with Claude for now. It was already touched on in what we heard so far. You know, there is this discussion about, I mean, on the one hand, yeah, AI will help us solve some challenges, but also, why are we focusing on the energy consumption of data centers and AI? There's steel, there is aluminum production and all these things, and they use enormous amounts of energy, and why are we focusing so much on AI? What is your reaction to something like this?
I think in order to understand what is the difference between a data center consuming electricity and a steel or a car. So climate change means you have to get out of fossil fuel. If you have thermal, diesel, or gasoline cars, you replace them by an electric car. So that is a positive electricity use because it gets you out of the fossil trap. If a steel company replaces coal steelmaking by steelmaking which is more relying on electricity, and then you have renewables behind, you reduce the carbon footprint of steel. And that's all about, that's climate policy in reality. Energy transition means reducing every fossil use by a renewable use and often using electricity as the energy carrier. So the electricity use is good when it goes up, and because it replaces an electric car will consume, but it will reduce the fossil fuel use. The electric arc in the steel industry will replace fossil coal. But a data center will not replace anything. It will be an additional electricity use. So there's a big, let's say, systemic difference between enhanced or more electricity use which replaces fossil or data center which creates new electricity. And I was a peer reviewer of that IEA study. This study is a scandal because it suggests, can you imagine, it suggests that in US, which is the biggest market, it suggests that the Trump administration, which has just forbidden to even to speak about climate change, that in that market, AI will generate a lot of reduction of emissions where it is not even allowed that you have companies working on climate issues. So it's completely absurd, this study, and we have to destroy the whole narrative around the tech companies claiming that AI will automatically lead to a better climate world. It is just not true. And this brings me to what AXA is doing is fantastic. Be aware that a Microsoft Office uses 5 times more than a comparable other Office program. But nobody knows about it. Because when you buy a washing machine or when you buy a TV in Europe, you have a label. You go to the shop and you can say, okay, I want to buy a very efficient refrigerator. And you have an A for the efficient ones, and you have a D or an E for the inefficient ones. So what we need is you buy an office, and then you see that Microsoft is D or E or F, and you have another office program which has A. So what we need at EU level is we need to regulate the tech and the IT. One of the most important issues is regulate the carbon footprint of the IT services. And we can build on the research you have done, research which Öko-Institute has done in Germany. So we have the academic data to do this. It's just a political decision to enable not only citizens, but also the biggest user of IT in Europe is the public, state and local governments. So public procurement for schools, which programs they use, or for the fiscal administration, which program it uses, as long as it is completely blind on the footprint, it cannot do a good action. So we need urgently this labeling of IT services. And the other thing which we have to do, the tech companies, I really worked with them. We had a lot of meetings on the 100% Renewable Alliance, and they helped me to build basically a political majority around renewables years ago. But now they have broken their own promise that they will be carbon neutral. So somebody who breaks his voluntary commitment, the only thing which is then left is tough political regulation. So which we need now is a new data center has to be 100% real-time renewables. a new data center has to give its excess heat to a local network. One of the absurdities of data centers is that they are placed on the North Pole, where you can't use the excess heat. The next generation of data centers need to be in the city centers so that we can replace the fossil heaters of the buildings in the city center by the excess heat of the data, or we place them near a paper mill which needs heat. So we need to bring this together. That will only happen with regulation. And the last absurdity is, I don't know, how many of you have an electric car? Are there some people here in the room who have an electric car? So if you have an electric car today in Europe, you are basically motivated to charge it during the night because then there's less stress on the grid, or to charge it in the afternoon when there's a lot of solar. So every owner of a car, we motivate him to be system compatible with solar and wind. And then we have a data center which is 100,000 times bigger, and they just say, I don't care to be system compatible. I need 100 megawatt. 100 megawatt is 3 times a steel company, a steel and electric arc, 3 times, so it's really big. And they say, I need 100, I'm system relevant, so I cannot be flexible at all. And that is a nut which we have to crack, because if you want to make them 100% renewables, you need to impose them flexible. And it's easy. So Google has 10 data centers in Europe. If in Ireland, for X reasons, there's system stress on the electricity grid, you just need to ship the data to the Swedish Google data center, and then you can reduce the load in the Irish data center. This is technically very easy to be done, but Google says, I'm not ready to do it for sheer economic optimization, because they want to optimize the investment they have done in the data center. But that goes against, I would say, even fundamental justice. Every heat pump owner, every electric car owner is pushed to be system compatible, and the very big guys, the very rich guys, they do not need to care about. So, and last, all this will be decided in the next 6 weeks. Because in 2022, we were 5 ministers to introduce in an EU legislation the obligation on EU Commission to monitor and then to take regulatory action on the data centers. This report was due for 15th of May, 2025. This report didn't come out, so they will come out in 6 weeks. So in 6 weeks, European Commission will decide if they will have a labeling on new data centers, if they will have minimum energy performance standards for data centers. And if Commission is not going down that way, that means that we have a whole generation of data centers which will just not be system compatible, and they will trigger fossil gas and destroy our climate agenda, which we have had so much pain and work to bring it to that level. Okay. So it's really, the next 6 weeks are very, very important for the regulation of the whole data center impact on the energy transition.
Okay, and now we try to take a little detour, because the question, of course, is what can we do about it? And I think it's a great segue to come back to Fanny, because you are now the policy director of the AI Collaborative, which is a rather new initiative that was founded about 1.5 years ago. And I quote, it was created to help govern artificial intelligence based on democratic values and principles, and to ensure that the public has a critical voice in AI governance and development, which sort of speaks to what Claude just said. And at the AI Action Summit in Paris in February, you launched an organization that you incubated, in a sense, and that is called Current AI. And it is reported to have secured funding from governments, tech companies, and philanthropies to the amount of no less than $400 million. So can you tell us a little about what these two entities are and what your plans are to also do something about what we're discussing here.
Yes, but before I do that, can I just say,
No.
I need to respond, and then
Of
we
course.
can come back to this later.
Yes.
So I think there are 2 points on what you said that are very relatable to this audience. One of them is this whole idea of tech companies and allies 15 years ago, or how many years ago, like around the Arab Spring, the democratization of speech and the promise, and which is the complete opposite now, and it's enough to see, let's say, how Palestinian voices are oppressed on these platforms. But there's just one angle, and from a free speech perspective, but also how many of us looked at them at the time as allies on government surveillance, and how that shifted. So I think this room has a lot of experience in managing those stakeholder shifts. And the other one I wanted to say, it's really hard not to see the data protection analogies of how there's so much responsibility was put on the individual instead of the big player. And despite regulation, that power dynamic is still there. So whether it's 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, I don't know, but I think we need to do that urgency together. So I just wanted to mention. And then one absurdity, I like the absurdity framing. I really recommend that you look at the OpenAI Stargate press release. You mentioned Stargate from a summit perspective, but they just announced the partnership between Oracle, OpenAI, and the US government. And it's full of absurdities and oxymorons about OpenAI trying to prevent military use while they're having military contracts, or how they will ensure democratic principles with organizations like Oracle, owned by Larry Ellison, who's done a lot of things, but they were not in for democracy. And the list goes on. I don't want to derail the whole conversation, but there's an analysis on that assessment. And as a segue to your question, what we hope to do with current AI and the AI collaborative is something different from what OpenAI and Stargate announced. So the AI collaborative where I work is a philanthropic organization. It's part of the Omidyar Group universe. Some of you might know Luminate, for instance, who have been in this space for a long time. And as a philanthropic organization, the assumption is that we make grants, which we do, but we also think that there's the moment, both in politics, but also in AI, requires more direct engagement and more urgent action than just enabling the field, which is definitely part of our mission. And as one example of this direct and political engagement, our CEO, Martin Tisney, was appointed by the French president to be a thematic envoy to the summit, and we wrangled the public interest track for the summit, which was in itself a interesting exercise to try to impose informally better multi-stakeholder rules and have more voices than there would normally be. And other than that, there was one of the major deliverables that we managed to get off the ground, as you referenced, current AI. And so what is current AI? That's the question. It's a multi-stakeholder global partnership, and it was set up to reshape the AI landscape, to address some of the power concentration and lack of public interest investment. In the AI collaborative idea of AI, we absolutely support the notion that there are areas where AI should not exist, like abolitionist and prohibitions are part of our affirmative vision. But we also think that there will be some other AI investments, and it does matter that if that AI development and use will go in the public interest or not. And what we're trying to do is divert this type of investment into AI that is compatible with that affirmative vision, and that affirmative vision must rely on not only human rights norms, but for instance, planetary boundaries. So that's the relationship here. And there is a underlying framework, charter that we launched, which is on AI in the public interest, and then there are 10, 11 country partners. That's why I'm using the Stargate analogy, because we do have country partners from Chile through Slovenia and France and others, and we will see how we can influence their thinking and doing and building toward the public interest.
Okay, cool. Just to get a feel for the room, are there already questions? Please put your hands up if you already have questions. Okay, yeah, I see a couple. So just one follow-up to you, Fanny, and then if it's okay, Jill, we can go to questions immediately. Yeah, okay. You said, or you explained to us what current AI is, and I need to be clear about this. You're not responsible for current AI. Still, I would like to ask you one question about their climate and sustainability work, where it says that improving transparency and accountability standards for reporting on AI's impact on nature and communities is a crucial first step towards ensuring that AI growth aligns with planetary needs. AI's environmental impact must be measured, managed, and mitigated. And this is, of course, something that, I think all of us here agree on the panel, but at the same time, or when you announced this, I don't know whether you were surprised as well, because that was a quite, a fast-paced shift that happened, but in this entire narrative that we already talked about in France and in the European Union, it was away from that sustainability of AI and using that as an opportunity more to, okay, we need also to be a competitor in this race, and we need to win this race, or at least be on the same level as the United States and China. And how did that policy shift, how did that affect you?
Yeah, so in terms of the summit and the climate outcomes, I really want to draw attention to something that Jill was involved in, but there's a really important civil society statement with the real climate demands around the summit that I think everybody should look at, including phasing out fossil fuels. So our work and then the geopolitical shift. The geopolitical shift, I think it means an impetus and an opportunity that it's even higher to do something differently than what's described there. And as a starting point, I think for us, I mentioned what the affirmative vision looks like, but I think there's an important distinguishing from AI for good or AI for sustainability pitches, business pitches mostly, or narratives, both in terms of the public discourse, but also the substance of the work. The main difference between that and what we think is that AI for good, AI for sustainability, will always center the technology instead of the people or the planet. And so and bringing people together across these silos is something we would like to achieve with these resources. And our work, it's only starting now. There's an interim committee is being set up. There are some programs selected. And what I can say is that one of these measures and metrics problem was very early on the agenda, and it continues to be. And we talked about the difficulties of that, and we didn't even mention, or very briefly, the extractivism of raw materials, but also land and labor, and how it impacts global majority people and countries. And so we are definitely open to put money into efforts that can create these more inclusive spaces, but also measurements, for instance. But beyond, nothing is decided yet on how this money will be allocated. So please talk to us.
Okay, so we'll try. First of all, you need to wait until the microphone is there. Secondly, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself if you want to. If you want to stay anonymous, of course you can. And please try to phrase a concrete question instead of making a statement, and also let us know who you're addressing the question to. And if you say, to all of the panelists, I'll take the liberty to assign it to one of them, because otherwise we can only answer one question. Let's go this way, and starting with, third row. Or
A very exciting panel. Thank you all for the contributions. I have very short questions for a few of you.
Oops.
The first one is for Jill. If I understood your nice presentation correctly, then data center operators are paying twice for energy, for the renewable energy certificates that they are using to offset their record, and then for the energy that they are actually consuming on site. The second question is for you. Cloud terms, I read in the news that Luxembourg was just banging its chest because they have a supercomputer and a very new AI data infrastructure, and they say it's fully sustainable. Is it, I ask you? Yeah. Fanny, are you also...
Okay, no, sorry, no. two questions maximum per person. Okay.
That's okay.
Please, Jill.
Thanks, yes. I personally love making comments instead of asking questions, so very sympathetic, but please don't. It's a really good question. Yes, they are, and that also underlines a bit the flaw in the system now, that they are paying twice, but they're able to pay twice because the renewable energy certificates they're buying are incredibly cheap. Actually, like a lot of the certificates being bought in Europe today are from Norwegian hydropower that was produced like a decade or two ago, and Norway has so many of these certificates that they're just flooding them onto the market. So in the details, this market is very warped in a lot of ways. And yes, moving to hourly matching would require a different pricing structure for the companies, but is actually, like the IEA in their report, one of the useful aspects of their report was that they pointed out that it is actually price competitive to other energy sourcing to be buying hourly matching renewables. And I would point out that the tech companies are the richest companies in the world, so the bulk of the market, and they really, I was told by an energy expert, they spend 1% of their budget on energy. They could spend 2%, they could double it, and this would not make much of a dent, and it would make a huge difference to the planet.
So these data centers which are existing today in Luxembourg, what they do is they are, for example, they are using the excess heat to dry pellets, which then drives a local cogeneration. But there is absolutely no evidence that the electricity which they use is renewable, so it's 24/7 renewables. So they claim to be more virtuous than they are. And of course now I'm no more in the government, so I can be more outspoken about it.
So I'm not going to ask you about party affiliations now, but please, the next question. I think there were more, right, on that side. We are going clockwise. Yeah.
Yes, hello, I'm Flavio Piemontese. I'm a student at the University of Glasgow. And I study international relations with a particular focus on security. And of course, the environment comes up a lot. But I have to say, like here, it feels like a very unfair situation in a way, because we, as Europe, are pulling, finally, somehow it looks towards some kind of strategic autonomy compared to the US. I know this is more geopolitics, but when you see all the dependency we've built on the internet system from the US, I understand very well the race for the AI and the need to detach a bit from this monopoly, which makes it very disturbing, because obviously this climate issue is very real, and so it seems like an impossible, solution. I don't see a way out of this, because also like all the solar panels are made in China, and all our money with the next generation EU is going to China. I don't know, it seems like a cat biting its tail in some way.
Okay, I'll try to phrase this into a question, and I'll ask it to Boris. You know, he's our expert on international relations. No, seriously, I'm asking you because there is this underlying assumption that there's only this one way to achieve autonomy. Do you agree with that when it comes to AI and the development of it?
So I think that like autonomy in the sense that there's one leader in the technology and and the other ones follow. That's a big question. I mean, we've seen other players now coming up, and they showed that it was actually possible to make smaller models, smaller AI models that were almost as capable as the other ones. There was always a catch with it. So when I'm referring to DeepSeek, for example, it was found that they were using results from the OpenAI models, and so they were kind of piggybacking on another system, which just means that they were not exactly building the system from scratch. It still lets us hope that there is the possibility to develop smarter systems, smaller systems that are much more energy efficient and as capable, and maybe resource limitations as China has, because they didn't have the latest GPUs to build these systems, can be a driver for innovation.
But I will also follow up, you know, like with the very open question, because I think this assumption is that, you know, the future is only in, for example, generative AI or LLMs at, you know, the huge models. But from your perspective, what is the goal of this? Because, I mean, of course we asked Donald Trump and Sam Altman to be on the panel, but they didn't answer my question, so I need to ask you.
So I think there was really this time when in the technical development it showed that the bigger the better. So the more data you could use, the longer you could train the models, the better the outcome and the more impressive were actually the results. And I feel like we have kind of peaked. At least that's what I hope. So I see new solutions that do not follow this track anymore, and I hope actually that the development, and since there's so much interest now in this technology, so many people are working in it, smart people are working in it. So I see ways of doing this in a different way, being it smaller specialized models, for example. AI is not always the solution to any problem, obviously. So that's what we teach a lot, our data scientists, because obviously when you're into tech and when you're excited about new technology, you tend to always like try to use the biggest model and the latest model, but that's not the best solution for a technical problem, of course. So yeah, I'm hopeful for your.
Okay, so where's the microphone? Was there another question on that side? Because there is one over here in the second row. Okay, then please, you go first, and then here, second row on my right-hand side. Sorry.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm a data and privacy consultant here in Brussels. My question would be mostly to Jill. I know from, let's say, mostly media outlets that there have been a lot of outages, for instance, of energy in Ireland, but also in the Netherlands because of the amount of the consumption of energy from data centers and the difficulty of powering also this infrastructure with respect to the energy needs of also just households or people in the neighborhoods. And an issue linked to that is the infrastructure capacity, so the grid capacity to actually provide and carry the energy that is needed, both to this infrastructure and to household and citizens. So I was wondering if you had any remarks on that.
Thank you. That's a great question, and I wasn't expecting it because normally we only talk about the grids with the grid nerds. But yeah, this is one of the reasons we're really concerned because, you know, if you look at the macro level, it's problematic. But if you go dig deep into some key locations, the problem is really out of control. I mean, we learned from a Greenpeace report that came out just 2 weeks ago that Dublin, I'm from Dublin, the data center capacity is now nearly 80% of the entire electricity consumption for the city. And yes, it is putting real pressure on grids, and what the grid operators are experiencing is a deep unwillingness from the companies to really help out and to really do something about this. Claude mentioned demand flexibility. You know, I've heard from grid operators that they said, maybe the data centers can be flexible, but they're not flexible today. You know, they're not doing it, and it's a question mark whether they can or whether they will do that with their energy demand. And one problem that's coming down the line is these, it's one big amount of energy in one place, and what you have is if there's any perturbation in the system, the data centers think, oh shit, we're worried about this, we're going to take ourselves offline, and then we're going to run on our backup generators because we can't afford to be here if the system is fragile. And when they do that, they cause a huge problem for the whole system, which is really carefully balanced and really hard to operate. And I would also mention the transparency question comes up a lot for grid planning and data centers. You have an issue of data centers forum shopping, so they will go and tell Dublin and Amsterdam and some in Paris that they're going to build like a 500 megawatt or a 600 megawatt data center. They're only planning to build one of those data centers, but each grid operator, each utility is like, oh dear, we have to scramble, we have to get this energy, and it's really hard to plan a grid. And the grid operators have told me, like, they can't even get the information from the data centers on what their load projection, we call it, that's like the future power demand. So just a basic question, how much demand, how much power are you going to need in the next 5 years so we can plan the grid? That's a trade secret. They can't tell you. Microsoft can't tell you because they don't want Google and Amazon to know how much they're planning to build because that might tell them something about their business plans. Unfortunately, that problem is not a problem that the rest of us should be dealing with. We need to know how much power need the grid is going to have so we can plan it properly. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, okay. So if you thought this whole discussion about AI and data protection was complex, you know, then now we also have the the energy policy on top of it. Okay, please, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Luisa Franco Machado. I'm the founder of Equilabs, a youth-led digital rights lab. My question goes to Fanny. I was very interested and surprised to hear about the AI collaborative and also current AI, and especially because we hear, especially in the nonprofit space, that there is this crisis of funding, right? There is no funds for public interest technology or nonprofit. And as someone who's building a nonprofit in this area, I wanted to ask, what do you think was different in this project, or really how do you see this sort of scenario going forward? Thank you.
So yes, like the whole point where I started, I think there's a lot of money in AI, and our play was, how can we direct at least some of it that is already a visible number? You know, it's still pretty low compared to these companies' market power, but it's already a visible number. We're not talking about a 50,000 grant to a single organization. What was different is the combination of actors, and there's no way to do this without some governments being involved. And as someone who comes from Hungary, like, I don't take that lightly. I have no more trust in any government than in any tech company, and even so-called democratic governments are violating rights, individual and collective, all the time. But I do think that we need to create demands and incentives for public interest investment to go to the right place. And one aspect, of course, is, let's say, this AI development. But if I can bring it also to the civil society sector, I find it completely absurd that American private philanthropies are providing a big chunk of funding for European public interest groups. And the European Commission and the national governments need to step up and not step back following what's happening in the US. And I mean, I can tell you a little bit more maybe over a drink what happened, but I think the first thing, like, I hate a civil society. I used to hate these summits. I mean, I'm sure you can relate to it. Like, it really drags you out of core work and you have to engage on somebody else's term, and there's only so much you can do, but they have a forcing function. And we use that forcing function to make something happen that can hopefully contribute to something that we believe in this room.
Thank you very much. Michele.
Michele, Algorithm Watch. So I have two questions. The first question is kind of playing the devil's advocate. I think at least the big companies, very big ones, they will claim that maybe in the short term they are worsening the carbon situation, but in the middle term we're building our own nuclear power plants, so we will make energy with no carbon fossil track cheaper. And so maybe in the middle term we can actually help out, at least with the carbon emission issue. The second point was about labeling, was just as you made the example of the appliances at home, a big difference is that the consumptions of, say, a washing machine is not elastic with respect to the energy efficiency. So if we make more energy efficient washing machine, people are not going to buy more probably because of that, and even to use them more in their home. But if we give some sort of label to the AI services, say generative AI, to be energy efficient, then say Anthropic will tell it's a 20 euro fee average paid user. Okay, until now I stopped you after 2 hours of using, or say I stopped you with a big window, but now you will be able to use this longer. So the reaction, basically the equation is less energy correlates with less compute, correlates with less cost to the user. Let's say if we're measuring these per request. And that is a cheaper product more people can use. So how do we rank that?
Okay, so I'll assign the first question to Claude and Jill, and I'll assign the second question to Boris and Fanny. Okay, do you remember the questions? Otherwise, I'll try to remind you. Claude, go ahead. First one was, what about companies being able to develop, for example, fossil-free or CO2 neutral energy sources?
So with Jill and some others, we discussed, is that nuclear hype of the tech companies, is it real or is it just a cover? And I think it's a mix between the two. At first, they tried to suggest that they will go nuclear so that there will be no gas, or gas will just be for 4 or 5 years, and then nuclear will come in. And to be a bit provocative, I challenge Amazon, Google, and all those. So if they are really believing in nuclear, I would say you do not get any permit for a new data center unless you build on-site with the data center a small modular reactor. So, and you will not, the only way for you to build a new data center in Europe is you have to build the small modular reactor in the same moment on the same spot. And I'm pretty sure that they will say, are you crazy? Because they know that small modular reactors don't exist, at least for the next 10, 12, 15 years. So it is a PR gadget, which of course the nuclear lobby, which was desperately searching for somebody credible to buy their incredible story, they are happy that the techs are now basically saying nuclear is possible and quickly possible and is cheap. And what they will do is they will try to get a lot of public money in order to get another credibility. Governments believe the story, so it's not so dramatic. There will not be so much gas. And where I got really angry is when you look at the IEA figures, they suppose that almost all gas will be replaced by small nuclear reactors in 2030. Small nuclear reactors exist in power points. Full stop. They are very far away from reality.
Okay, thank you very much. I was already signaled that we only have 3 minutes left, right? And we need to stop on time because everyone wants to get out and get a drink. 1 minute each. Jill?
Thanks, that's fine. I don't have much to add. Claude said most of it. I will add on the SMRs that my colleague who's worked on that for a long time likes to say it's been 20 years that we're 5 years away from an SMR being built. And on the larger nuclear, there is a lot of talk and hype from governments, et cetera, about bringing nuclear back to solve this problem. But the costs, the scale, the timelines mean that it's never coming in to solve the totality of the demand problem that we actually have. And this narrative that we should not worry about what's happening in the next 5 years and really bet on solutions coming in the 2030s to solve it, whether that's carbon capture and storage or nuclear. All this does is prevent us from doing anything today, and we're going to find ourselves in really hot water if we don't.
Okay, thank you very much. Boris, now the labeling question combined with energy elasticity and yes, the price. Go ahead.
Yes, so the problem really is that the cost currently does not reflect, the price of how much you pay for a subscription does not reflect the real cost. That's because these companies have a lot of investment money they burn through. They are all looking for market shares, and it's not a stable market currently. So if we, in a perfect world, that we would have carbon pricing, we would have electricity would not be subsidized, and then the cost of the systems would reflect the real cost, including the environmental impact, and then probably we could just let the market solve the problem. But that's not the case, obviously. So until then, I think labeling is a very good idea, more like for the big AI models, so the makers of systems can actually decide between the systems. I want to point out that I would not shift the responsibility to the end user because, so in the discussion around frugal AI, that's what I sometimes see, and individuals are asked to decide every time if they should Google this or if they should use ChatGPT. I think it's not going to work because people always use what's convenient, what works, and so first of all, that's why I don't believe in blaming the end user. Second, I think the real leverage is with the big tech companies, and you can already see technology developing towards like agentic AI, where the end user just makes one request and then the system solves complex problems itself. So it's completely beyond the control of the end users. Reasoning AI consumes much more electricity as non-reasoning AI. So I would really like to have the discussion to focus on the AI providers who have the biggest leverage here.
Okay, thank you. And a funny signal to me that she didn't really want to answer that question. So I'll give you carte blanche for your last comment.
I mean, I agree. I already talked about it. That's why, like I mentioned, the same thought earlier about the individual versus the systemic responsibility. So what I will say is, as a closing thought, that we started with like bridging with different actors, how many CPDP this is, and I think it's good to invite people in, but I think inviting out is also an action item. And so if you are always at CPDP, then I think we need to find conferences that are more on the climate urgency and those people. I just don't believe in always others having to meet us where we are. And so I just like to get out of my own comfort zone for next time.
Thank you very much. I've been way out of my comfort zone for quite some time, discussing these energy topics, and it is a very rewarding experience. So yes, I encourage everyone else to do this. Thank you very much. I mean, you're already doing it. You've done it, and you stuck around until 20 to 7 after a very long day. Thank you very much to you for this as well, and for your clever questions. And thank you very much, of course, to our fantastic panel, Jill, Claude, Fanny, and Boris. And enjoy your evening and your drinks.